Eric, we're both pretty damn high on John Harbaugh, right?
Absolutely.
But I wonder why he got fired.
Wonder indeed. And we have a special guest with us today to answer that question. A Baltimorean. I don't know if that's how you say it, but close enough. It's Clay from Clay Train Productions. Welcome to the show.
Eric, thank you. Noah, Eric, thank you guys for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. Did I get that right? Are you a Baltimorean?
Yes, sir. That is how they refer to us nowadays. Yeah, I guess
Okay,
so.
good to know. Good to know. We want to talk John Harbaugh because he is probably the top coaching candidate in our minds for the Cleveland Browns job. But obviously, your team, the Baltimore Ravens, felt differently. So we want to just jump into that.
Absolutely.
So, Clay, give us a little background. What led up to John Harbaugh really getting fired for your franchise, especially being, such a highly esteemed coach, a guy that will be in the Hall of Fame one day?
Absolutely. And to start off, I want to say that, it's unfortunate that this is what had to happen. With that said, it is what had to happen. The Ravens had a press conference today with owner Steve Bisciotti, and he kind of hinted at the fact that there was a lot of, looking at projections from where we were supposed to be. You look at the start of this year, we were Super Bowl favorites. And you look at the last 3 years, 2023 AFC Championship, 2024 divisional round, exit. This year missing the playoffs. That's 3 straight years of decline in what's supposed to be the prime of Lamar Jackson's career. And I think you've hit a breaking point where the message is stale. And to me, what broke it the most is you could have sat here and said, we could fire Todd Monken, we could fire Zach Orr, but why are we at the point where we're gonna bring in 2 new coordinators? Say we have another year like this year again next year, and then we're right back to the drawing table. We're a whole year that we wasted. You're gonna fire more coordinators and inevitably fire Harbaugh when it's something that probably this is the time to do it. It was a successful marriage until it wasn't, and unfortunately, all good things come to an end.
So let me ask you this, Clay. Do you ascribe to the rumor mill that they moved on from Harbaugh because he wouldn't move on from Munkin?
No, no, I think there's a lot of hearsay, especially from the Baltimore media, and I think that Steve Bisciotti has always worked in the shadows as our owner, and I think Steve Bisciotti's a great owner, but I think that there's a lot of people with sources in Harbaugh's camp, especially from the Adam Schefter side of things. There's no doubt to me that, you know, ESPN and Adam Schefter have Harbaugh's best interest in their pocket. Ian Rappaport would have more sources into what's going on in the castle in Baltimore and everything from an organizational perspective. One thing that stands out to me with Harbaugh is, and this is not a bad story about Harbaugh, but I remember there was a story a couple years ago. He went to Jimmy's Famous Seafood and paid for, everybody in the restaurants, food, but he paid for, he paid for a few tables, absolutely, and it was a very kind gesture, but ESPN wasn't at Jimmy's Famous Seafood that day. So, Jimmy's Famous Seafood isn't running to Adam Schefter or ESPN and saying, "Hey, look what John Harbaugh did." So, it just shows how the media can be manipulated. It came out, that I think it was Adam Schefter, someone from ESPN reported that players were crying in John Harbaugh's office when he got fired, and it was this shocking, breaking thing. But it came out that Harbaugh got fired in a phone call as he was driving home. None of this is true. So and I think Todd Monken was a very successful offensive coordinator here, and he was a real guy. And I think that there was more. I think Lamar and Todd Monken probably didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things, especially as the offense was struggling. But it wouldn't shock me if Todd Monken went along with John Harbaugh wherever he goes.
That is the interesting question, and you guys both bring up Todd. We talk about Todd. There's a rumor going around in Cleveland media specifically that our GM Andrew Barry asked for that interview that we had with Todd Munkin to kind of rattle the nest, shake up what you guys have going on there to push for the John Harbaugh firing. So maybe help us out a little bit. And now in return, you guys are interviewing a guy that we're interviewing for our head coaching position in one Jim Schwartz. So there is a lot of interdivisional rivalry going on, even in the front office realm. At least that's what the media is saying. I know you said you don't subscribe to the idea that uh, they fired Harbaugh because he wouldn't move on from Mudkin, But do you subscribe to any of this shaking up any of these type of theories that are out there right now?
I think you can put a little bit of truth to the matter, and I think there's a little bit of, not true lyness to the matter. I think it's somewhere in the middle. It's funny, Andrew Berry actually graduated from the same high school as me in Maryland, so, I know he probably has a little bit of spite towards the Ravens organization as a Cleveland Brown now. But no, I think Jim Schwartz would be a very good candidate for both the Browns and the Ravens, and I think Todd Monken, if I'm not mistaken, he was an assistant in Cleveland to Freddie Kitchens, if I'm
Yes,
not
he was.
mistaken.
Unfortunately,
So,
that year.
Yeah, we could
so
forget that era, but yes.
yeah, but I think Todd Monken brings a very good aspect, and I don't think that Todd Monken getting interview request is what drove the needle. Steve Bisciotti said today he was asked the question if Tyler Root made that kick, would John Harbaugh be sitting here today as we speak? And he said, in quote, he would have his job for one more week. So I think after losing to New England on Sunday Night Football, even when Lamar getting hurt, and you just got to look at the fact that the Ravens went 3-6 at home this year. I mean, you guys know it's hard to play the Ravens, and Noah, as you know, when I met you at the game, it's hard to play in Cleveland. Cleveland's a hard place to play. That's just the AFC North,
Yeah.
and you know you just can't go 3-6 at home. I think it's one of those things that you can forgive a lot of things, but when the direction of the franchise is going in a downward spiral, articles are coming out, and it's unlike the Ravens. The Ravens have always kept a kind of a close lip, tight knit, you know, from the media. And so when you're seeing stories that Lamar's falling asleep in meetings and you're seeing that there's, coercion there, you start to get to the point where you're Steve Bisciotti and you're like, all right, something's got to give. So
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this, Clay, because I do want to touch on if John Harbaugh would be a good candidate. Before we get there, is there any kind of sense in Baltimore right now of nervousness? And what I mean by that is, you obviously have one of the best quarterbacks in the league. I think Lamar Jackson is a guy that, if he stays healthy, could take you all the way. And yet now you lose your head coach, you lose your OC. If you make the wrong hire here, it could set your organization back years. And I get where you're coming from. The only pushback that I'd give a little bit on is that Baltimore over the years, they have made the AFC championship and they ran into the Chiefs. They ran into prime New England. It's the same issue with Pittsburgh prior to these last 7 playoff losses, but similar issue. You're running into these really good teams that go on to win the Super Bowl. How much of that can we actually lay at Harbaugh's feet? And are you nervous for what's next?
And let me jump in here real quick
yeah,
too, just because it adds to your question. I think of a lot of your guys' big losses as like, damn, that was a bad moment, like a missed kick in Pittsburgh to end the game, or a drop ball by Likely and in the end zone. There's so many examples I think of these almost or could have moments that I just don't think you can blame on coaching. So to parlay into what Eric asked you, there's the question from both of us.
yeah. I think at a certain point you have to lay some things on coaching, and that's the one thing about the Ravens organization as a unit is you go down as a team, whether it's from the top of the organization to the bottom, and it's respectable. You know, we blew Harbaugh as the Ravens head coach has blown the most two possession leads in the last 30 years. I mean, at some point it gets to a point where these heartbreaks keep happening. You think back to week one and you look at how the season ended. I mean, those were two just gut wrenching endings. You were up by 15 with 4 minutes to go in Buffalo week one. Those are things that can't happen, and they're coaching errors.
As a
And
football fan, for the record, I loved that game. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't have much skin, and I was obviously rooting for the Bills, but loved that game.
yeah, I mean, it was great for football, but then it's just like it was almost it was just a reflection of what's been going on the last couple of years that you know something has to because you're not going to move on from Lamar. You just can't. Lamar's 29 years old in the middle of his prime. At the end of the day, he's a Hall of Fame quarterback, and at some point you got to choose. If you got to choose between the 29-year-old franchise QB or the 63-year-old coach, who at some point you're going to be moving on from anyway, just because of age, you got to go with the guy in his prime that's the leader of your team. And I don't think that's what it came down to, but you know, I don't think that Lamar was happy. I don't think that there was a beef between Lamar and John Harbaugh, but I also think that you expect to win at this point. And what's going to have to show with Lamar, and Lamar's gonna have to be a man at the end of the day. His cap hits $74 million this year. Lamar's got to get an extension done by the time the league year opens. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to fix the offense lineup. We're not going to be able to get pass rushers. It's going to be the same holes that you went into last year, complained about, and then you got hurt. You played hurt all year, and you didn't quit on the team. But there was times where it was like you're not practicing, you're not doing this, and I don't blame them. But at the same time, how can we fix these holes that are bothering you when you're sitting here playing candy ass, not getting a restructure done, not getting an extension done? I mean, we went through this shit 3 years ago where he signed his contract extension on draft day. We were at the point we had him tagged. The Ravens might have had to take a quarterback round 1 that year if we didn't find out at 5 o'clock on draft night that Lamar's coming back. You know,
That's fair. So, hesitation and feeling around Baltimore on new
yeah.
coach and just newness in general.
I think it's a bit of nerve, but also excitement. I think I'm really excited. This is the first time since I was 3 years old that the Ravens got a new head coach. I mean, it's
Yeah,
pretty crazy to think
2007.
about.
Put that in
Yeah.
perspective. Yeah.
I mean, you think about how different the world since George Bush was in office. I mean, like, I there's nerve to it, but I think what calms me down is I trust Eric DeCosta, and I also just I trust Steve Bisciotti. His background comes from employing people, as he started a employment company. That's where he made his fortune. So, when he hired John Harbaugh in 2008 or 2007, 2008, going into 2008, John Harbaugh wasn't the Jesse Mentor or the Clint Kubiak. He was the special teams coach. He just came from the Eagles, came from a good tree under Andy Reid. But he didn't call plays. He didn't The thing that John Harbaugh did was he built a culture, and the difference is the team that he took over was Brian Billick's team, and that team didn't necessarily like John Harbaugh. Ray Lewis didn't like John Harbaugh. Ed Reed didn't like John Harbaugh. They didn't really get along. It wasn't until they won the Super Bowl and Ed and Ray Lewis's last year that it was kind of like a come to God moment where they were like, okay, like we're never going to see eye to eye, but we got to do this. So, John Harbaugh has always had his critics and he's always had the people in his corner, but the one thing you can't take away from Harbaugh, what he did here was win a Super Bowl, one, but two, he built an amazing culture. I mean, the culture that, the Ravens are looking to build on. The Ravens aren't looking to completely tear down what was built. The Ravens are looking to grow and go in a direction where whatever coach we'd end up on, I'm going to trust Eric DeCosta in his hiring, and I'm going to hope he's here for another 18 years, and that maybe we win more than one, and Lamar's happy, and we can just keep building. But yeah, I am nervous, but not nervous in the sense of like I don't trust our front office. Whether it's Stefanski, Flores, Kubiak, Minter, whoever the hell it is, they're going to go through a huge vetting process, and I think that's going to be the guy.
Nervously optimistic is what it sounds like your take is.
Yeah.
You mentioned our former head coach. Obviously, there's been plenty of jokes about, Tomlin going to one team, Stefanski going to another, and then, of course, Harbaugh going to another. What do you feel about the Browns' former head coach as a candidate for you guys? Because we could sit down on a show with you and tell you why he needs a couple years to reflect on his time here.
Yeah, Kevin Stefanski to me is a good candidate. You don't win coach of the year 2 times for no reason. That being said, he's not at the top of my list. I think there's a reflection, like you said, that has to be done from his time in Cleveland, and there needs to be a little bit of a decompressor. And I just don't think at the moment that he's the guy to lead this football team. And if he's chosen to be, then he is. But I think right now what the Ravens need is a defensive-minded coach. I think from an offensive perspective, the Ravens haven't figured out. Lamar Jackson's gonna be Lamar Jackson, and you have Derrick Henry, whether he's getting older or not. You have your guy to run the ball
Right.
25 times if you put the right people in charge to, don't put them in a rotation with, other running backs.
Do you have a top candidate in mind right now?
I go back and forth. I think to me it's between Anthony Weaver and Jesse Minter. Anthony Weaver is kind of not a prominent candidate in my mind. The Ravens interviewed him today, but he was Harbaugh's assistant head coach for 2 years. He's been with the Ravens organization for a long time, and I think that he knows the Ravens culture. He played for the Ravens in 2002 and beyond, so he was here before the Harbaugh days. And if the Ravens really want to instill that Ravens way of the 2000s, I think he'd be the prime candidate to do that. I also think with him being Mike McDaniel's DC the last couple of years, I also think that could bring Mike McDaniel into Baltimore as an offensive coordinator for a year before he takes a head coaching job somewhere next cycle.
Interesting. You mentioned culture. I want to bring it back to the Browns because
Yeah.
if the Browns need anything, it's probably a culture builder. How do you feel about John Harbaugh as a fit for the Browns organization?
As much as I would hate to see it, I think John Harbaugh would be great for the Cleveland Browns. I think when I talk about John Harbaugh, I kind of reflect on how great my childhood was and how great I just knew consistently that even though the Orioles were going to stink, I knew that the Ravens had a consistent, successful team, and that John Harbaugh ran a no nonsense business, and that I could count on that team for 5 months to get me through winter. John Harbaugh would be to Cleveland exactly what they need. Cleveland needs to find, even though John Harbaugh's not younger, they need to find a guy that can build a culture. And if John Harbaugh could go to Cleveland or the Giants or the Falcons or whoever he lands on, if he goes there and builds that culture, that could be that next step for that next guy that's going to come in. And John Harbaugh, he's always seemed to have decent coordinators, and obviously as well liked as he is, he could bring anybody he wants into his assistant coaching staff, which he could groom into being the next head coach of the Cleveland Browns. But that's the thing the Browns have been lacking for so long is culture. I mean,
Yep.
you go coach after coach after coach. Harbaugh is going to bring you that. You give me 8 years, I'm going to get you. I'm going to get you into at least contending at some point for a Super Bowl. You got to draft right. You got to do other things right. It's like the problems that Mike Tomlin saw in Pittsburgh the last few years. But having that consistent culture builder, I don't know what else you can ask for.
I'll take it
I'll take it. You're
immediately.
singing, you're preaching to our audience right now because I'm telling you that is to a T what every Browns fan wants is just some experience and some culture and a direction for once. Because I feel like even though Kevin Stefanski does have his two coach of the years, I feel like we ended up directionless as a franchise, and to have that type of direction would just really truly help. I know we're division rivals, but it would help us be such a better team. And hopefully Jimmy Haslam can brack up the Brinks truck and give Harbaugh whatever he needs to come in here, like he did for Deshaun Watson. And I hate comparing the two situations,
Yeah,
but like he did for Watson years ago.
and just to think about it, I mean, the one thing with the Browns, and like you said, even though we're division rivals, I like seeing the AFC North be good and competitive. To me, every team nowadays is trying to go, and this isn't any a knock on Jesse Minter at all. Every team's trying to find the flashy new toy that looks
Yep.
successful and is 38 years old and he's going to change the game.
The
Jesse
Sean
Minter's going to be
McVay,
a fine
yeah.
coach, exactly, but there's there's teams out there that need the guy that's already been there, done that, can build the culture. The Browns, Kevin Stefanski was never a head coach. Kevin Stefanski did good things, but Kevin Stefanski was building a culture from being an offensive coordinator. The Browns haven't really ever brought in that guy that's going to be, all right, let's build this culture. I've done this before. Guys respect me. There's no respect from Hugh Jackson, Freddie Kitchens.
Yeah.
None of these guys. You had Baker Mayfield. You had the number one pick, and you fucked it up. I don't know if I can cuss, but you
Yeah,
know,
you're fine.
yeah, but you had Baker Mayfield, and that guy gave his heart, and from my perspective, gave his heart and soul to that team. Went into Pittsburgh and won a playoff game, and then you dumped him off because he played hurt all year. He didn't have to play hurt.
And that might fall at the feet of a guy that might end up coaching your team if they do hire Kevin Stefanski. But that is a conversation for another time because there was a lot of weird blame that went around there. I don't know if you've ever paid attention to how much Stefanski and Baker ended up butting heads, and that's how they ended up
No,
moving
I
on
didn't.
from him. Yeah,
I
that's
was gonna
that's
say I,
that's a,
I remember the Odell beef and with Odell's dad, but I
yeah.
didn't really pay attention much to the Stefanski and Baker aspect. I just knew that Atlanta was gonna get Watson, then all of a sudden you guys came in and backed up the Brinks truck.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Unfortunately.
ho- hopefully we do that for Harbaugh because it doesn't hurt our salary cap, and we could get a culture
I
building coach.
mean, Greg Roman could come in as a run sorry to interrupt, could come in as your run game coordinator and really get Quinshon Judkins going with his back from injury. Like
It
Greg
would be
Roman is he knows how to run the ball. I'll tell you that.
it's fun. Eric, what else you got to ask him, man? I think I'm about at the end of my list. But what do you got?
Yeah, no, I think that's it, Clay. Tell us about your show. Plug what you have going on down there.
So yeah, the Let's Talk About a podcast. It's something that I do with a couple of buddies back home, Tyler Barber's. Jake Owen, Cam Bryce. We got our thing going. We got football. Our football podcast is Break the Huddle. We also do baseball, which is the Let's Talk About It main platform. I also got my own thing going. Me and my buddy Sam do it on Clay Chain Productions. We talk Ravens football. We talk the Orioles. We haven't really done much on that, but we're starting to really try and grow on that as well on the side of doing Let's Talk About It. So yeah. So
And to give the background real quick, I've been on one of the Let's Talk About It episodes, so make sure you go check that out. I actually met Clay at the Browns Ravens game, and that's how this collaboration and continued collaboration, as it will continue to happen, came to be. So, Clay, we really appreciate you coming over to At the Office, sitting down, giving us some perspective on John Harbaugh, and really just making sure our listeners know the good, the bad, and the ugly about a guy that I think a lot of Cleveland would be really excited about.
absolutely, Noah, Eric, it's been a pleasure. I'd love to do this again. I really appreciate you guys.
For
Yeah,
sure.
let's
You'll
talk
definitely
soon,
be on
buddy.
again.
Yes, for
Absolutely,
sure.
absolutely.
Alrighty.
That was fun. Clay's a great guy. I love talking AFC North rivalry. I like Clay, but I hope his team suffers all the failures for the next couple decades to come. Even as he's off stage listening to me say that, I stand by it. But listen, when you're the Cleveland Browns and our fandom, we have not had any kind of success to talk about. So I think he's absolutely right, though. Everything that we've preached about John Harbaugh being that culture setter, it's absolutely what the Cleveland Browns need as a head coach, and I think they would find a lot of success there.
I think they would find a lot of success too, and the perspective helps. It's similar but different. Harbaugh's 10 times the coach Stefanski was, but Stefanski staled out here. That's what happened
Yeah.
to Harbaugh too. But Harbaugh has so many more of the prerequisites that make sense for our franchise now that makes us excited for him. Uh, as Stefanski does for some other organizations. I don't think he's a great fit for Baltimore. I hope Baltimore hires him though, so he turns Lamar Jackson into a robot back there and a statue and all the stuff that we saw happen with our quarterbacks here.
I'll tell you this, I think it will be a lot more palatable to watch John Harbaugh blow a timeout call or not use a timeout correctly when you have 10 wins on the season. When you have 4 and your coach is doing that, it is a very frustrating experience. But I am all the way in on Harbaugh. I hope the Browns are as an organization as well. I'm sure they are. I hear behind the scenes that those conversations are happening. But it'll be interesting. There's a lot of really good positions open.
There is indeed, and they seem to keep opening as playoff results continue to draw out. Obviously, the Steelers' job opened up. We talked about Tomlin yesterday, so make sure you go check that video out. We talked about Harbaugh when Harbaugh the news broke last week, so make sure you check that video out. We've talked about every head coaching candidate possible at this point on this page. I'm about head coached out. I'm ready to do some lackadaisical, some media reactions, some other stuff here on the page. So make sure you stay tuned at the office for all the Cleveland Browns content that you need in this offseason.
I wish Mike Vrabel would be fired again, but I think that's too much to ask for. On that note, the debate never ends, but the show does for now. We'll see you next time.